At 09:34 hours on April 18, 1943, First Lieutenant Douglas Canning broke radio silence. Bogies! 11 o'clock high. Major John Mitchell, leading 16 P-38 Lightnings at wave-top altitude off the coast of Bougainville, looked up. 2 Betty bombers, 6 Zero fighters, exactly as intelligence had predicted, exactly on schedule. The formation was 15 minutes from landing at Balal Airfield. In the lead bomber sat Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the combined fleet of the Imperial Japanese Navy, architect of Pearl Harbor, the man who had started the war between Japan and the United States. Mitchell had flown 435 miles over open ocean using dead-reckoning navigation at 50 feet altitude to intercept this formation at this precise moment. He had calculated compass headings, airspeeds, and fuel consumption on a napkin the night before. He had arrived within 1 minute of the planned interception time. Now he gave the order his pilots had been waiting to hear. Skin 'em off and let's get them. Within 5 minutes, Admiral Yamamoto would be dead. The course of the Pacific War would be altered, and Operation Vengeance, the most precisely executed aerial assassination in military history, would demonstrate what signals intelligence combined with American air power could accomplish. This is the story of a mission that should have been impossible. 550 nautical miles from base, 2 hours over open ocean, interception calculated to the minute, engagement against superior fighters, return flight on minimum fuel, executed by Army pilots in fighters designed for something entirely different, approved by the President of the United States, made possible by cryptographers who broke Japanese codes, planned to kill 1 man. The narrative begins not in April 1943 but in December 1941. At 07:48 hours on December 7th, Japanese carrier aircraft struck Pearl Harbor. The attack was meticulously planned. 6 carriers, 353 aircraft, 8 battleships sunk or damaged, the Pacific Fleet crippled, 2,403 Americans killed. The attack succeeded beyond Japanese expectations. Admiral Yamamoto had planned every detail. He understood American industrial capacity. He had studied at Harvard from 1919 to 1921. He had served as naval attaché in Washington twice. He had traveled across the United States. He knew America could outproduce Japan 10-1. He had opposed war with the United States. He told Japanese leaders that he could run wild for 6 months to a year but could make no promises afterward. He was ordered to plan the attack anyway. Yamamoto delivered. Pearl Harbor was a tactical masterpiece, but it created something he had not anticipated: American fury, a determination to avenge the dead, a willingness to take extraordinary measures to kill the man responsible. Yamamoto became the most wanted man in the Pacific. Intelligence services tracked him. Commanders waited for an opportunity. That opportunity would take 16 months to arrive. Between December 1941 and April 1943, the war turned against Japan. At midway in June 1942, American carriers destroyed 4 Japanese fleet carriers. Yamamoto had commanded the operation from battleship Yamato but never engaged. His carriers were sunk beyond the range his battleships could intervene. At Guadalcanal between August 1942 and February 1943, Japan lost the attrition battle. Ships, aircraft, pilots. The losses were irreplaceable. By April 1943, Yamamoto recognized Japan was losing. He launched Operation One Go, a coordinated air offensive against Allied positions in the Solomons and New Guinea. Between April 1st and April 16th, Japanese aircraft struck targets throughout the region. Pilots reported sinking 12 transports, 2 cruisers, 1 destroyer, and destroying 134 aircraft. These figures were wildly exaggerated. Actual Allied losses were approximately 1 destroyer, 1 tanker, 2 cargo ships, and 25 aircraft. But Yamamoto accepted the reports. On April 13th, he decided to inspect forward bases to congratulate the pilots personally. On April 14th, his staff transmitted the itinerary. Message number 131755 departed Rabaul at 1400 hours, Rabaul time, 0400 hours, Hawaii time. On April 14th, the message was encrypted using Japanese naval cipher JN25D. The cipher was theoretically unbreakable. The Japanese believed it absolutely secure. They were wrong. 3 American radio intercept stations received the transmission. 1 at Dutch Harbor, Alaska. 1 on Wahiawa, Hawaii. 1 in the Aleutians, The signals were forwarded to Station Hypo, the Fleet Radio Unit Pacific at Pearl Harbor. Cryptographers began decryption immediately. Among the cryptographers was Ensign John Paul Stevens, who would later serve on the Supreme Court from 1975 to 2010. On April 14, 1943, he was 23 years old and assigned to decode Japanese naval traffic. The message he worked on that morning would be the most significant of his naval career. By 0600 hours Hawaii time, the message was decrypted. The text was clear. On April 18th, CINC Combined Fleet will visit RXZ, R, and RXP in accordance with the following schedule. 6:10 departing Rabaul by medium attack plane, escorted by 6 fighters arriving RXZ at 0800. The message provided complete details of Yamamoto's inspection tour. Commander Edwin Layton, Pacific Fleet's intelligence officer, brought the decrypt to Admiral Chester Nimitz at 0800 hours. Nimitz read it twice. He looked at Layton and asked the critical question, "Do we try to get him?" Layton had known Yamamoto personally. He had served as naval attaché in Tokyo before the war. He respected Yamamoto's abilities. He also understood that Yamamoto was irreplaceable. The Japanese Navy had other admirals, but none with Yamamoto's strategic vision, his understanding of air power, his prestige among the fleet. Yamamoto's death would damage Japanese morale and operational capability. Nimitz sent the decrypt to Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox in Washington. Knox presented it to President Franklin Roosevelt. The decision reached the Oval Office. Multiple accounts suggest Roosevelt's response was immediate: get Yamamoto. Other accounts suggest he was more cautious, aware that such an operation could reveal American code-breaking capabilities, regardless of his exact words. The decision was made. Authorization came back to Nimitz. Execute. But authorizing the mission and executing it were different problems. Rabaul to Balale was 315 miles. Yamamoto would travel in a straight line. But American aircraft could not fly straight. They had to avoid Japanese radar stations on Bougainville and Shortland Islands. They had to approach from an unexpected direction. The route would exceed 400 miles one way. Over 800 miles round trip. No American fighter in the Solomons had that range except one, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. The P-38 was an unusual aircraft. Twin-boom configuration, twin Allison V-1710 engines, tricycle landing gear, central nacelle housing the cockpit and armament, 120mm Hispano cannon, 450 caliber Browning machine guns, all mounted in the nose for concentrated fire. Maximum speed 414 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. Service ceiling 44,000 feet. But the critical statistic was range. Internal fuel capacity 300 gallons on early models, with 2 external drop tanks of 165 gallons each. Total fuel capacity reached 630 gallons. Range with drop tanks exceeded 2,000 miles. Combat radius approached 1,000 miles under ideal conditions. The P-38 was the only American fighter that could reach Balal from Guadalcanal and return. On the evening of April 17th, Major John Mitchell, commander of the 339th Fighter Squadron, was summoned to operations at Henderson Field. He found himself surrounded by high-ranking officers. Rear Admiral Mark Mitcher, Commander Air Solomons, Major General Nathan Twining, Commanding General 13th Air Force, multiple staff officers. The atmosphere was tense. Mitchell was told the mission. A high-value target would be flying from Rabaul to Balal on April 18th. The aircraft would depart Rabaul at 0610 hours. It would arrive Balal at 0745 hours. The flight time was 1 hour 35 minutes. Mitchell's P-38s were to intercept and destroy the target aircraft at precisely 0935 hours local time. Mitchell was not told the target's identity. He was told only that it was extremely important. The operation was classified top secret. Failure was unacceptable. The P-38s would fly at minimum altitude to avoid radar detection. Radio silence would be absolute. Navigation would be by dead reckoning. Mitchell would plan the route, calculate the timing, select the pilots, and lead the mission. He had less than 12 hours to prepare. Mitchell returned to his squadron and selected 18 P-38G models. 16 would fly the mission. 2 would be spares. He divided the flight into 2 sections. The killer flight, 4 aircraft, would attack the bombers. The cover flight, 12 aircraft, would engage the escorts and provide top cover. He selected his best pilots: Captain Thomas Lanphier, Lieutenant Rex Barber, Lieutenant Besby Holmes, Lieutenant Raymond Hine. These would be the killer flight. Lanfear and Barber were the primary shooters. Holmes and Hine would fly wing. Mitchell then calculated the route. Straight-line distance from Henderson Field to the interception point was 435 miles. But flying straight meant detection. Japanese radar covered the direct approach. Mitchell plotted a dogleg course. Southwest from Guadalcanal. West around the southern tip of New Georgia. Northwest toward Vella La Vella. North to the interception point off Empress Augusta Bay on Bougainville's west coast. Total distance, 550 nautical miles. 330 miles outbound over open ocean with no landmarks. Navigation purely by compass and clock. Arrival time had to be exact. 1 minute early, and they would miss the Japanese formation. 1 minute late, and the bombers would be landing under the protection of Balale's anti-aircraft batteries and 75 Zero fighters stationed on Bougainville. Mitchell calculated airspeed, fuel consumption, and flight time on the back of a navigation chart. The P-38s would cruise at 220 miles per hour, indicated airspeed at 50 feet altitude. This speed maximized range while minimizing fuel consumption. At this speed and altitude, the flight time would be 2 hours, 7 minutes. Takeoff at 07:25 hours. Arrival at 09:32 hours. Climb to attack. Altitude would take 3 minutes. Interception at 09:35 hours. The timing was perfect, but it assumed everything worked. The drop tanks had to feed properly. The engines had to run smoothly. The navigation had to be precise. The weather had to cooperate. The Japanese had to be on schedule. Any single failure would abort the mission. Mitchell assembled the pilots at 0400 hours, April 18th. He briefed the route and timing. He emphasized radio silence. He explained that this was the most important mission any of them would ever fly. He still did not reveal the target's identity. At 0710 hours, the pilots manned their aircraft. The P-38s were parked on Henderson Field's pierced steel planking runway. Each aircraft carried 2 165-gallon drop tanks under the wings. Each tank weighed approximately 1,390 pounds when full. The added weight and drag reduced performance but extended range to over 2,000 miles. The armament check revealed problems. Lieutenant Joe Moore's guns would not charge. He was scrubbed. Lieutenant Jim McClanahan's drop tanks would not feed. He was scrubbed. The 2 spare aircraft, flown by Lieutenant Besby Holmes and Lieutenant Raymond Hine, moved into the killer flight. 16 P-38s would fly the mission. At 0725 hours, Mitchell began takeoff. The P-38s accelerated down the runway. The heavy drop tanks created drag and reduced climb performance. The fighters struggled to gain altitude. Mitchell kept them low, 50 feet above the water. The flight formed up over the waters north of Guadalcanal. At 0730 hours, Mitchell turned southwest on the first leg. For the next 2 hours, the P-38s flew in near silence. Radio silence was absolute. No one spoke unless absolutely necessary. The engines droned. The Pacific stretched endlessly in all directions. Some pilots counted sharks. Others counted whitecaps. Mitchell flew by compass, airspeed, and watch. The navigation had to be perfect. The formation flew in elements of 4 aircraft. Mitchell led. The killer flight flew to his right. The cover flight flew, stepped up behind and above. The fighters stayed at 50 feet altitude. Wave tops occasionally splashed the propellers. The risk of hitting the water was real, but radar could not detect aircraft this low. Surprise was essential. At 0830 hours, Mitchell turned west. Second leg. At 0905 hours, he turned northwest. Third leg. At 0920 hours, he turned north. Final leg. The coast of Bougainville appeared ahead. Green jungle. White beaches. No sign of Japanese activity. The fighters began climbing to attack altitude. At 0934 hours, Lieutenant Douglas Canning spotted the Japanese formation. Bogies! 11 o'clock high. Mitchell looked up. 2 Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bombers. 6 Mitsubishi, a 6M0 fighters. The bombers were at 6,500 feet descending toward Balale. The Zeros flew escort above and behind. The formation was exactly where intelligence predicted. Exactly on schedule. Yamamoto's reputation for punctuality had been his undoing. Mitchell gave the order. All sections, skin 'em off. Get the bombers. The P-38s jettisoned their drop tanks. The tanks tumbled away and splashed into Empress Augusta Bay. Freed of the drag, the Lightnings accelerated. Mitchell's cover flight of 12 aircraft climbed to 18,000 feet to engage the Zeros. The killer flight, now numbering 4 after 2 aircraft, had mechanical problems earlier. Dove toward the bombers. The Japanese were surprised. They had not expected American fighters this far from Guadalcanal. The Americans had flown 435 miles. The Japanese believed P-38s had a combat radius of 200 miles. The bombers were 15 minutes from landing. The escort was minimal, only 6 Zeros. Normal escort for an admiral would be 20 or more fighters. But the Japanese believed they were beyond American range. They were complacent. The complacency cost them everything. Captain Lanfear and Lieutenant Barber made the first pass. They climbed toward the bombers from below. The Zeros above them reacted slowly. Some dropped their belly tanks and dove to intercept. Others maintained position. The confusion gave Lanfear and Barber critical seconds. Lanfear engaged 3 Zeros head-on. He fired a burst. The Zeros scattered. Lanfear broke left and dove toward the lead bomber. But Zeros were closing. He was forced to maneuver defensively. His run on the bomber was spoiled. Barber had a clear approach. He dove on the bombers. The lead Betty broke left and dove for the jungle. The second Betty continued straight. Barber followed the lead bomber. He closed to within 100 yards. Point-blank range, he opened fire. The 20mm cannon and 450 caliber machine guns fired continuously. Approximately 600 rounds per minute combined rate of fire. The bullets and shells struck the bomber's right engine. The engine caught fire. Shells penetrated the fuselage. The right wing began to trail smoke. The bomber shuddered under the impacts. Barber's fire was accurate and sustained. He held the trigger down for approximately 3 seconds. 50 rounds struck the bomber. The right engine exploded. The bomber rolled violently left. The wing dipped. The nose dropped. The Betty plunged into the jungle at 400 miles per hour. The impact was catastrophic. The bomber exploded on contact. Wreckage scattered across 200 yards of jungle. Fire erupted. Inside the bomber, Admiral Yamamoto was still strapped in his seat. He had been struck by 250 caliber bullets. One entered his left shoulder near the collarbone. The second entered his lower left jaw and exited through his right eye. The jaw shot was instantly fatal. The bullet destroyed the brainstem. Yamamoto was dead before the crash. The bomber carried 3 other passengers: Vice Admiral Takajiro Onishi, Rear Admiral Takagi Joshima, Yamamoto's Chief of Staff, Captain Yasuji Watanabe. All died in the crash. The crew, 6 men, also died. Yamamoto's body was thrown from the wreckage on impact. He remained strapped in his seat. His white-gloved hand still gripped his katana. He sat upright in the jungle, dead, while the wreckage burned around him. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Besby Holmes attacked the second Betty. This bomber carried Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, Yamamoto's Chief of Staff, and several staff officers. Holmes made a high-side pass. He fired into the bomber's left engine and fuselage. The engine caught fire. The pilot attempted to ditch in the ocean off Moila Point. The bomber struck the water at high speed. The impact was brutal. The fuselage broke apart. Water rushed in. Ugaki was knocked unconscious. He awakened underwater. The fuselage was sinking. He struggled free and surfaced. 3 other survivors were pulled from the wreckage by Japanese search aircraft. Ugaki survived. Yamamoto did not. The air battle continued for several more minutes. The Zeros engaged Mitchell's cover flight at 18,000 feet. The fighting was confused. Lieutenant Raymond Hine was shot down and killed. His P-38 crashed into the ocean. The other Zeros were driven off or destroyed. Claims and counterclaims about Zero kills were disputed after the war. Japanese records showed no losses. American pilots claimed multiple victories. What mattered was the mission succeeded. Both bombers were destroyed. Yamamoto was dead. The P-38s withdrew at maximum speed. They flew south at low altitude. Fuel was critical. The outbound flight and combat had consumed most of the fuel. The fighters had perhaps 45 minutes of flight time remaining. Henderson Field was 2 hours away. One P-38 crash landed in the Russell Islands. The pilot was uninjured. The remaining 14 fighters struggled back to Guadalcanal. They landed with tanks nearly empty. Some pilots reported less than 10 gallons remaining. The mission had consumed 620 gallons of fuel per aircraft. Mitchell had calculated 630 gallons available. The margin was 10 gallons, approximately 12 minutes of flight time. If the interception had been delayed or the return flight prolonged, aircraft would have ditched in the ocean. But everyone except Hine returned. The mission was a complete success. At Henderson Field, Mitchell finally revealed the target's identity. The pilots were stunned. They had killed Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, the commander of the combined fleet, the most important admiral in the Japanese Navy. The shock was followed by elation. They had accomplished something extraordinary, but the mission had to remain secret. If Japan learned the bombers were intercepted by fighters, they might suspect their codes were compromised. The United States Navy had spent years breaking JN-25. The intelligence advantage was priceless. Revealing the source could end the advantage. A cover story was prepared. Australian coast watchers on Bougainville had observed Yamamoto boarding the bomber. They radioed his position to American forces. P-38s from Guadalcanal intercepted based on this information. The story was plausible. Coast watchers operated throughout the Solomons. They provided valuable intelligence. The Japanese might believe the interception was based on visual observation rather than code breaking. The cover story was disseminated. Pilots were ordered not to discuss details. The mission remained classified. For 3 weeks, the secret held. Then journalists arrived. The mission was too dramatic to suppress completely. On May 21st, Japan announced Yamamoto's death. The announcement stated he died while engaging the enemy at the front. No details were provided. The Japanese people mourned. Yamamoto was a national hero. His death was a devastating blow to morale. On May 31st, Time magazine published an article. The article stated that P-38 pilots on Guadalcanal had shot down 3 Japanese bombers over Bougainville. The pilots wondered if they had killed some Jap bigwig. The article did not explicitly name Yamamoto, but the implication was clear. The Japanese did not connect the Time article to code breaking. They apparently believed the cover story. American intelligence breathed easier. But British intelligence officers were furious. Britain had not been attacked at Pearl Harbor. They did not share American desire for revenge. They believed killing one admiral was not worth risking the code-breaking secret. The breach could have been catastrophic. But the secret held. Japan never realized their codes were compromised. American codebreakers continued reading Japanese naval traffic throughout the war. The intelligence contributed to victories at Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf. Yamamoto's death was one success among many enabled by signals intelligence. The immediate impact of Yamamoto's death is difficult to quantify. Japan appointed Admiral Manechi Koga as commander of the combined fleet. Koga was competent but lacked Yamamoto's vision. He did not understand carrier warfare as Yamamoto did. He was more cautious, less innovative. Under Koga, the Japanese Navy became increasingly defensive. Offensive operations decreased. Initiative passed to the Americans. More significantly, Yamamoto's death damaged Japanese morale. The pilots who had reported glowing results from Operation One Go were devastated to learn their commander was dead. The inflated claims were revealed as wishful thinking. The realization that the Americans could strike anywhere, anytime, at anyone was sobering. If Yamamoto was not safe, no one was safe. American morale received a corresponding boost. Yamamoto had planned Pearl Harbor. American servicemen hated him personally. His death was satisfying on a visceral level. The message was clear. America would hunt its enemies to the ends of the earth. No one who attacked the United States would escape retribution. The strategic impact was more subtle. Yamamoto's death did not change the outcome of the war. Japan was losing in April 1943. Japan would continue losing after Yamamoto's death. American industrial production was overwhelming Japanese capacity. But Yamamoto's death accelerated Japanese decline. The Japanese Navy lost its most capable commander at a critical moment. The replacements were adequate but not exceptional. The decline in leadership quality contributed to the disasters that followed. The controversy over who shot down Yamamoto's bomber began immediately and has never been fully resolved. Captain Thomas Lanphier claimed credit. He stated he made a high-angle deflection shot that blew off the bomber's wing. Lieutenant Rex Barber claimed credit. He stated he made a stern chase and fired into the bomber's engines and fuselage. The dispute lasted decades. Modern analysis favors Barber. Japanese recovery teams found Yamamoto's bomber crashed in the jungle 3 miles inland from the coast. The wreckage showed damage consistent with stern attack. Bullet holes in the fuselage and engines. Fire damage. No evidence of wing separation in flight. The bomber appeared to have been shot down from behind, not from the side. This matched Barber's account, not Lanphier's. Additionally, Japanese doctors performed an autopsy. Yamamoto had been struck by 2 bullets. one in the shoulder, one in the jaw. The bullet trajectories indicated fire from behind and below. This matched a stern chase, not a high deflection shot. Barber's account was consistent with the evidence. Lanfear's was not, but Lanfear's claim received initial credit. He was charismatic. He had influential connections. He gave interviews. He wrote articles. He became the public face of the mission. Barber was quieter, less interested in publicity. His claim was overshadowed. The Air Force initially credited both pilots with shared kills. Later analysis credited Barber alone. The dispute over credit is unfortunate. It obscures the mission's true significance. 18 pilots flew the mission. 16 engaged. 14 returned. Every pilot contributed. Mitchell's navigation was flawless. The cover flight protected the killer flight. The killer flight executed perfectly. The mission succeeded because of collective effort, not individual heroism. Operation Vengeance demonstrated what signals intelligence could accomplish when combined with operational capability. Breaking the code provided the information. Having aircraft with sufficient range enabled exploitation. Precise planning and execution delivered results. The mission was a template for future operations. Intelligence-driven, carefully planned, executed with precision. Modern special operations follow this model. The mission also demonstrated American reach. In April 1943, American forces were still primarily defensive in the Pacific. Guadalcanal had been secured only 2 months earlier. Most Japanese positions remained out of range, but Operation Vengeance showed American forces could strike targets anywhere in the Pacific, given sufficient intelligence and planning. The Japanese had no safe havens. The P-38 Lightning proved its value. The aircraft was designed as a high-altitude interceptor. It was employed as a long-range escort. It executed a precision strike mission. The versatility was remarkable. The twin-engine configuration provided redundancy. Multiple pilots returned on one engine after battle damage. The concentrated nose armament provided devastating firepower. The P-38 became one of the most effective fighters in the Pacific. The mission had risks. Flying 435 miles over open ocean at 50 feet altitude was dangerous. Navigation errors would be fatal. Mechanical problems would be fatal. The weather had to cooperate. The Japanese had to be on schedule. Any deviation would abort the mission. The pilots knew the risks. They flew anyway. The ethics of targeted assassination are debatable. Yamamoto was a uniformed military officer. He was a legitimate target under the laws of war. But deliberately targeting a specific individual based on intelligence intercepts set a precedent. Modern targeted killings using drones and special operations follow the same logic. Operation Vengeance was the first deliberate assassination of a named military commander based on signals intelligence. Whether this was morally justified depends on perspective. Yamamoto planned Pearl Harbor. Over 2,000 Americans died. He was not an innocent. He was a combatant. Killing him was tactically and strategically valuable. Most Americans in 1943 considered the operation justified revenge. Most Americans today agree. Japanese historians have mixed views. Some consider Yamamoto a tragic figure, a man who opposed war but served his country loyally, a brilliant admiral undone by his own punctuality. Others consider him a war criminal who deserved his fate. The debate continues. What is not debatable is the mission's execution. Operation Vengeance was a masterpiece of planning and precision. Mitchell's navigation was perfect. The timing was exact. The attack was effective. The return was successful. 18 pilots executed a mission that required everything to go right. Everything did go right. At 09:35 hours on April 18, 1943, Rex Barber fired a 3-second burst into a Betty bomber over Bougainville. Inside that bomber, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto died. The mission was over. The war continued. But something had changed. America had demonstrated it could strike anyone, anywhere, anytime. The message was received. 2 months after Operation Vengeance, American forces invaded New Georgia. In November, they invaded Bougainville. By February 1944, they had bypassed Rabaul. The Japanese stronghold that Yamamoto had flown from on his last day was isolated and neutralized. The tide had turned decisively. Admiral Koga, Yamamoto's replacement, died in March 1944 when his aircraft crashed in a storm over the Philippines. The combined fleet lost 2 commanders in less than a year. The command instability contributed to Japanese defeats at Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf. The Japanese Navy never recovered. Today, Yamamoto's bomber remains in the jungle where it crashed. The wreckage has been partially salvaged. Some components are in museums, but much remains at the crash site. The jungle has reclaimed it. Vines grow through the engines. Trees grow through the fuselage. The bomber is a monument to the man who flew in it and the mission that destroyed it. The tail section was cut away and brought to Papua New Guinea for display. The identification numbers are still visible. Betty bombers were not numerous. This one is recognizable. Tourists visit. Historians photograph. The wreckage is a pilgrimage site, a tangible connection to a moment when intelligence, planning, and execution converged to kill one man and change a war. In the United States, the pilots who flew Operation Vengeance received recognition. Mitchell received the Navy Cross. All pilots of the killer flight received the Navy Cross. Mitchell had been nominated for the Medal of Honor, but the nomination was downgraded after details leaked to the press. The security breach cost Mitchell the highest award. Rex Barber received the Navy Cross in 1943. In 1998, after decades of controversy and research, he was officially credited with shooting down Yamamoto's bomber. The recognition came too late. Barber had died in 1980, but his family received the acknowledgement. The record was corrected. History recognized the right pilot. Operation Vengeance remains the most precisely executed aerial assassination in history. 550 miles, 2 hours over ocean. Interception calculated to the minute. Navigation by dead reckoning. Engagement against escorts. 2 bombers destroyed. Target killed. 14 aircraft returned. Mission accomplished. And Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, 58 years old, planner of Pearl Harbor, commander of the combined fleet, died strapped in his seat holding his sword while his bomber burned in the jungle of Bougainville 3 miles inland from Empress Augusta Bay. The man who started the Pacific War died 17 months after the war began, 28 months before it ended. The mission was called Operation Vengeance. The name was appropriate.